Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about the War of Attrition. This is a comprehensive wave management strategy that I have been developing that I have never really seen used before and is extremely consistent if you get the hang of it. So let's jump into it and talk about what this War of Attrition consists of. So I'm sure we're all aware of the misconception that enchanters, they have to AFK and then wait till the mid game and then they're useless, but this War of Attrition is going to break that stereotype. This is an early game strategy to dominate the opponent through overwhelming pressure. And just as a general overview, you're looking to shove relentlessly, accrue a 2v2 lead, and pressure the whole enemy team. So the way we're going to break this explanation down is we're going to break it up into three parts. What is the War of Attrition? When should we do the War of Attrition? And why should we do the War of Attrition? Now let's start with when. When you should do the War of Attrition is when you are a ranged support. Let's say you are a mage or an enchanter, and you don't need to respect their kill threat. Now let's go over some relevant factors here. They may have low kill threat if they are a ranged support themselves, or if they're a warden, or if you have sufficient disengage for their engage, or if their engage spell is on cooldown, or if they are chunked and they no longer have engaged threat, or if the enemy support is roaming. This is quite a fluid point, but typically from Champ Select, you want to prepare yourself to do the War of Attrition when it is range versus range. I want to talk about why we should look to do that before we jump into the full explanation of exactly how to do it. When you are a ranged sup versus low threat, freezes aren't scary for either side. Let's say you try to freeze, they just walk up and break the freeze because you don't have gang set up or all in threat and they are potentially ranged and can clear the wave. If they try to freeze, the exact same thing can happen. You can just break the freeze. So freezes aren't scary because ranged champs can break freezes more easily and can't all in the long lane. So what's the plan? Should we just AFK, turn our brains off, and hope to get carried? Of course not. This is where the War of Attrition comes in. Okay, let's move on to what the War of Attrition actually looks like. And for the first game here, this is with a student of mine that I've been working with for months, and we've talked comprehensively about the War of Attrition for a while. And so we're going to have some great examples through his center gameplay here. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to get early prio. We want to make sure that we hit level 2 first, and we want to generate and maintain a minion HP advantage. Now the thing about the first wave is we don't want to hit the first wave too much. If we hit the first wave too much, then the wave will push up and then that could impact our level 2 spike. So I first want to show what should happen. We just make sure that we get level 2 first. We'll hit the melees of the second wave because after the melees of the second wave, you hit level 2. Level 2 spike is a huge deal for every support, every bot lane in the game. So really try to make the most of it. And you can see here, we're hitting the melees, we're pinging that we want to go forwards, our movements are going forwards, and we're looking to do something with that level 2 spike. Now, they're not always going to be in a position to get punished, but it's important that you try to use your spike. And then what we're going to do is ward in the bot river afterwards. Now, the reason why we want to put a ward here is because we want to be shoving up, we want to be pressuring. We're going to be opening ourselves up to a potential gank, but we don't need to respect that gank. So we want to be shoving and pressuring 2v2. We want to use our wards to spot out enemy ganks around our lane. The reason that we want to ward after the second wave is because this ward can cover the most common ganking routes. It can cover a 3-camp gank, so if Eve here did 3 camps and then ganked bot, we would be able to see it. It can cover the full clear, so if the jungler does all 6 camps and then moves down and then looks to gank on that window, this ward will still be active. And the reason that we're not taking sweeper is because we're not going to be contesting any bushes, we're not going to be sitting in them, we're not going to be freezing and setting up ganks. We want to shove, we want to push, we want to pressure, and use our vision to set that up. Okay, so now it's just going to come down to harassing enemy last hits and maintaining a minion HP advantage. And so this is going to tie into the end goal of the War of Attrition. We want to harass last hits from the enemy ADC. We want to poke the enemy ADC down. We want to slowly accrue a CS lead. They're too pressured to get every CS that gives some up. We're pushing minions under their tower. They lose minions to the tower. We're slowly going to poke them down. We're slowly going to take enemy plates. We're slowly going to pressure so much that the enemy mid and jungle is forced to try and relieve some pressure, but they just don't have the tools to do so. And the end goal is to consistently poke the enemy ADC down, so much so that they just have to base, and then we're shoving and they're going to miss an entire wave under tower. And then we'll just rinse, repeat, and it's just a really dominant strategy. And so the enemy ADC has to consistently walk up to try and get last hits. And then you want to be within range to poke them. So they either get poked while they go for the last hit, or they don't get poked and they miss the last hit. And what can also happen in the bot lane is you walk up to poke the enemy ADC, the support realizes their ADC is getting pressured, and then they start to use spells, and they start to get a little bit poked as well. So let's just see what that could look like, okay? As I said, naturally, they're going to be missing minions under the tower. They just missed 2 minions here. The Senna is walking up here, threatening to pressure Vayne off the last hit. Then Soraka feels like she needs to respond. She uses her E. She has no E now. She uses her Q, and so now we have some space to walk up and try to pressure some last hits. Now, I briefly want to talk about why the ADC and not the support. You want to poke out the ADC because, first of all, they're tied to the minion wave. They're always going to be open to getting poked because they need to last hit these minions. The second is that if the enemy ADC falls behind in experience and gold, then that is way more important than a support falling behind. As you should know, the support's golden experience is not really going to be a win condition for a team. So this is a game I was playing on my challenger main, and you can really see my intent to poke the enemy ADC out, which is Ziggs in this case. Using spells, using orders on him. Once again, really pressuring Ziggs from getting any last hits for free, and then if I can find windows to poke, I'm going to be poking. Otherwise, I only want to force him to CS with spells or potentially miss CS altogether. Once again, really finding windows to poke the enemy ADC, and now that the enemy ADC is low, he is forced to look for a window to base. Normally, this is going to take a lot longer of a time, to slowly whittle them down. So this is pretty accelerated, but we're getting towards that end goal, right, of forcing the enemy ADC to base and miss an entire wave. And so when they do get chunked, you want to flip a switch and go from maintaining control of the wave, maybe a small HP advantage, to just shoving as hard as humanly possible so that he misses as many minions under the tower as possible. So we're just going to have a look at what that can look like. It turns out that I know that he's going to look for a base, and so I can either be shoving and letting it crash into the tower, or I can go be annoying and cancel some bases. And you can also note that I'm just completely disrespecting a jungler's gank, because I don't think that they have enough threat. I don't think that Olaf is going to early gank me. I don't think that they have enough gank setup. I think Olaf really wants to full clear. Their ADC's chunked out, and so this is a really high pressure strategy that I'm employing. Let's say the jungler is trying to early gank me. They're not going to have enough resources to kill me, especially with their chunked ADC. We have all of these summers that we can use to help keep me alive. And if the enemy jungler does show, then that opens up himself for falling behind in the jungle 1v1 or even getting counter jungled. Okay, let's keep going. Eventually, I'm going to regroup over here and go right back to the War of Attrition. You can see he's only allowed to access minions with his Q. I'm not going to stand for him ordering any minions for free. And so eventually he's going to run out of mana very quickly. So in this game, he does have teleport, and he's going to teleport back into lane and not necessarily lose that wave. But I'm sure you can picture this situation with any other ADC who is not going to take teleport. Once again, poking the enemy ADC while he is going for last hits. And now I'm really flipping that switch to hard shove. Every single opportunity I get to auto minions, I'm going to be. I don't have to use my spell on the wave necessarily, but I really want to make sure we're hard shoving and keeping him under tower and generating that slow bleed War of Attrition advantage. So it's going to be hard for him to pick up all of these last hits under tower. Naturally, we're going to chip their tower down, like I said. And we're just going to keep it up. This is very oppressive, very hard to deal with. And you can see already we almost have a plate. We have a significant CS lead already. But as long as you understand the concept that the ADC is always going to be open to getting poked because they have to look for these last hits. And so you can set up that win-win situation that I was talking about. Keep poking, keep chipping, keep pressuring. Keep your foot on the gas. And eventually he is forced to base, and in the vast majority of situations, he wouldn't be able to TP back and catch the wave. And so that's how you would generate the lead. And then you'd want to just rinse repeat that. Since you don't need to respect all-ins, you are safe from ganks with proper warding and proper positioning. So we want to use our wards selfishly. We want to use our green wards to deter enemy ganks. We want to use it in their shallow jungle. We want to use pink wards selfishly to give our lane more vision so that we can continue to dominate. So the enemy mid and jungle are pressured to move down and relieve 2v2 pressure, but they can't get the gank off due to your warding, your positioning, which we'll talk about soon, and just the low kill threat that they have. So for positioning, we want to position on the top side of the lane, so you can disengage gank attempts when you feel like that is a threat. The reason that we want to be on the top side is because we don't want to expose our ADC to the jungler. The support is always going to have some disengaged tools with which to deter the gank. This also prevents the jungler from being able to wrap around onto us, and so we can run in a more direct path to safety, our bot tower. This doesn't mean you want to be on the top side of the lane 24/7. Sometimes you want to be on the bot side of the lane, so you can briefly use those windows to poke from a bush and to drop aggro, etc. But we aren't going to be playing around the bushes comprehensively. We're not going to be camping them, and we want to, because we're going to be autoing minions a lot naturally, and so being in a bush then doesn't really achieve anything. So here's an example of playing the War of Attrition, but not backing it up with proper positioning. And so we're going to see ourselves get ganked, and that's kind of what we want, right? We want to get ganked by the enemy jungler. We want to draw in pressure. We want to waste his time. We want that gank to fail, and then the rest of our map can play with freedom. You know, our top side, our mid, our jungle, our Ornn can play as aggressively as they want. So we're going to see what happens here. We are on the bot side of the lane, and then we just kind of get wrapped around and collapsed. Warwick has complete free access into the lane, and then we have to blow our flash. Still, it's not the worst situation, but we can even dissuade this gank without having to flash at all. So let's picture on this window, we're a bit chunked, we don't have the most information on where the enemy jungler could be, and so if Senna was up here, on top side of the lane, then as Warwick wraps around here to gank, all we have to do, press a W, very, very easy to land, and someone just running in a straight line towards you, press E to disengage with our ADC, and then job done. Enemy jungler has ganked, didn't achieve anything, awesome. Remember, we will choose this strategy when the enemy doesn't have kill threat. So the Lulu cannot set up this gank properly, and we're always going to have some disengaged tools. So we talked about wanting to poke out the enemy ADC so that he misses that entire wave as that end goal. This is going to be an issue if you don't manage your mana and your abilities properly. Let's say this is the enemy ADC, this is the enemy support, and the wave is coming in, and he tries to last hit, and we're poking. And the next wave comes in, or the next time we have our abilities up, we're poking, we're slowly whittling him down. Eventually, we're going to force him to base, okay? What happens if we use some of our mana onto the enemy ADC, and then we're going to use some of our mana onto the enemy support, and then we're going to be like randomly buffing up our ADC, and then we're going to try and use spells when he's not going for a last hit, and then he just kind of jukes it, and it misses, and then we just don't have the mana pool to be able to poke him out and force him to base. You need to be deliberate with your spells. You need to make sure that you're using your abilities at high percentage times when they are last hitting. And also another great time is when they are locking eyes with you. And so I like to talk about this point as a Pokemon battle. You lock eyes with the trainer, you're in a battle. And so when you are in a battle, then your skills are going to hit, right? Let's say that I'm a Lulu, I lock eyes with the Caitlyn, I use my Q, I use my auto, she uses her auto and her Q maybe, my Q is going to hit. If I'm just like randomly fishing with my Q, then that's 50-50. That's a coin flip. That's not a deliberate use of your spell, and you're not going to be able to confidently wear them down until they have to base. So you want to manage your mana well, but it's also important to make sure that you guys stay healthy so that you guys are not susceptible to getting all-in or to getting ganked. It is much more important to have more health on yourselves than to have less health on the enemy. What this could mean for some champions, like Nami, like Senna, you want to flip a switch and start to use your spells to heal instead of to poke. And so what I would tell the Senna player that I've been working with for a while is to flip that switch and start healing the ADC. And maybe try and line up and snipe someone through the ADC, but healing is the priority then. Same with Nami, instead of using your W to poke, you're using your W to heal. So here's an example from the Senna's perspective again of what can happen if you don't hard shave once the enemy ADC gets chunked out. Then they have the freedom to shove a wave and to find a base without losing anything. So he gets to shove this wave, he gets to crash it, he gets to base, he gets to come back and not lose a single wave. Now let's have a think about if we are shoving into them, their wave is under tower, he's exceptionally low. We constantly shove, shove, shove. Eventually, he's just going to have to base or die to poke or consistently lose minions and eventually lose that full wave, which is the end goal of the War of Attrition. Let's say we have the enemy ADC under the tower and there is a wave under their tower as well. And then the next wave starts to come along and we don't hard shove that one. We just, hit it once or twice, or we're just hanging around. And then we get to build a stacked wave and then we crash that stacked wave. The enemy ADC is going to come back, catch the majority of that stacked wave and be pretty happy. There is no counterplay to consistently hard shoving the moment the enemy ADC gets low and is pressured to find a base. I'm going to say it again. The end goal is to make the enemy ADC lose an entire wave. They need to base before you. This means no cheater recalls. Make sure that you poke, you stay in lane, you whittle him down, you force him to base and miss an entire wave while you're shoving. Here's an example of exactly that happening. So this is another one of my students, the Zillion. He has been playing the War of Attrition. He's been poking them down. The Kai'Sa is exceptionally low. Here comes a new wave. Guess what we have to do? We have to hard shove. Enemy ADC is forced to base. We're going to use our auto attacks. Ideally, we are auto attacking this more often. We're going to use our spells. We want to shove this as quickly as possible. And then the ADC is going to miss this entire wave under tower. We can even get a plate or two if we want. And this is the end goal. It is important to note that you don't want your jungler to gank your lane. You are shoving, you are pressuring 2v2, so it's not a gankable wave state. You want your jungler to be extremely efficient with his pathing, get ahead of the enemy jungle, and gank the other two lanes, which is going to have a much higher chance of success. Now, the only times that you would want your jungler to gank your lane is if you are losing the War of Attrition and you need him to just kind of help you out, bail you out, shove out a wave so that you can get a recall off, or if you've been winning the War of Attrition and they are so low that they are diveable. Now, it's very important to rinse and repeat this. Keep your foot on the gas. This is the most common mistake by far from my students, not keeping their foot on the gas. Every wave is a fresh start for the War of Attrition. You have, crushed a wave into the enemy tower, your wave dies under tower, and now a next wave is coming. And if you're not hitting that wave in advance, if you're not generating and maintaining that minion HP advantage, you might give them an opportunity to shove, to get a base off. So what that's going to mean is damaging the enemy wave while the enemy is farming under tower. And it's also going to be looking to auto-attack the wave before your wave even arrives in the lane, or at least pressuring to, posturing, looking for those autos. If you have lost the War of Attrition and you're stuck under tower, what you need to do is wait for your next wave, then guard that wave like it's the president. Don't allow them to freely damage your wave, and then that fresh start, maybe you can damage their wave, and you're back in the War of Attrition. If you embrace this strat, you will solo carry some games. You will win some unwinnable matchups in other games, and in general, you are going to be in a great spot in a lot more games. I want to talk about the kings of the War of Attrition while getting to show you guys some more examples of it being performed in a game. So the absolute king of the War of Attrition is Heimerdinger. He can constantly shove. He gets to disrespect enemy engage because he is just fantastic if the enemy engages on him with his turrets. His turrets are exceptionally healthy and he can just get prio and maintain it in every matchup. We're going to see here we are versus a Rel, an engager with high threat. We're versus Zed, a jungler that can also look to have some pretty pressuring early ganks. And we'll see what ends up happening. But we have prio. And I am looking to maintain that prio. Looking to posture forwards. So when he walks up for a last hit, then he's getting poked, right? We talked about how important it is to pressure those last hits, to find those consistent windows, to poke the enemy ADC. I'm a little bit chunked, so I don't have as much freedom as I would like, but I'm posturing forwards on this window. I find an E poke. And here is a gank. And because Heimer is the king of the War of Attrition, I barely even need to ward. Like, if they're going to engage on me, I just play around my turrets, and then the rest is going to be history. So Rel tries to jump in and engage. I am playing around my turrets here. I'm waiting until Zed jumps in, then I'm going to use my E, and it's over before it even begins. Get a couple kills here, and then just go right back to dominating in the War of Attrition. The enemy C dies, which is kind of equivalent to basing, I guess. He's going to lose that whole wave, then we're going to find a recall. Eventually, he is going to come back to lane, and it's going to be much of the same. Look for windows to poke. Maintain minion HP advantage. And it's just really hard for them to do much. So Heimer is the absolute king of the War of Attrition because he can play that strategy in any situation, any matchup in the game. Senna is the next king of the War of Attrition. Now she can dominate versus any ranged matchup, any enchanter, any mage, because she has such great sustain and such great damage early on. So Senna is going to struggle against engagers, especially champions like Nautilus or Blitz or Pike, and so she's not going to be a champion that you can opt in for the strat in every single situation, but in a lot of situations, it's very common to be versing range supports in solo queue. She is going to be one of the best in doing so. The next king of the War of Attrition is Karma, and we saw an example of it in this game when we were versing Ziggs. She has amazing poke. Her Q is very reliable, especially when she has her R up so that she can power it and then it's easier to hit. She has a low Q cooldown, does quite a lot of damage. She has a lot of wave control with her Q as well, and so her identity is all about dominating lane as hard as possible, which plays right into the strategy of the War of Attrition. There is a flavor of the month pick floating around, and it is Jhin support. Now, he can be great at the War of Attrition because he can spam his Q early on to get prio. It's very hard to contest that. He has a lot of base damage, especially with his fourth shot, which has a lot of kill threat in lane and causes the enemy to have to respect that as well. He is being picked as a counter to Heimerdinger. However, I don't think he necessarily does counter Heimer. I think Heimer's turrets are just too tanky. The next king of the War of Attrition is Renata, and this is because she can opt in for the strategy in every single situation. Just like Heimerdinger, however, she won't always come out ahead, but she has fantastic disengage, and so whenever you verse an engager, you're actually enticed to pick Renata and to actually play that War of Attrition so that you can disengage and just dominate. We're under no pressure at all to hold a freeze. Even versus Nautilus, who has a lot of kill threat early on, I can just disrespect completely 2v2 and outscale, so Renata is really up there in terms of the War of Attrition. Now, Renata might lose the War of Attrition versus another support who knows about this strategy and contests her. If she's contested by Heimerdinger, if she's contested by Senna, by Karma, then she might end up losing it. However, she still wants to engage in that strategy in every situation. Now, Janna, she is another enchanter that has sufficient disengage in the laning phase to be able to opt into the strategy versus a lot of engagers. However, she's not on the same level as Renata because she is going to struggle against more champs. So Nautilus, she would really have to respect that hook. Blitz and Pike, they're going to be tricky for both of them to deal with, but trickier for Janna to deal with. And in general, she's just going to lose that war versus other enchanters, but still she wants to engage in the War of Attrition, part of her laning identity. Now, the last point before we move on, let's say you're in a losing range lane. Let's say you're Vayne, Janna versus Ezreal Karma, something really hard to play. The War of Attrition is always the best decision. Either you win the War of Attrition, you generate a lead in an unwinnable lane and you collect your free win, or you lose less. They'll have less minions to poke and deny under your tower. They'll put more attention into hitting waves than poking. Even if you go down a couple CS and a plate in a horrible matchup, this could be a huge win. I want to talk about exceptions and nuances now. You can consider indexing into the green tree into Resolve to tip the scales from needing to respect kill threat to being able to do the War of Attrition. An example of this could be taking Guardian as Karma versus Nautilus. If you verse a high threat jungle, but a low threat bot lane, you can freeze when you're lacking jungle information because you need to respect them ganking and killing you. But when you know where they are, you can War of Attrition in that isolated 2v2. If you have a high threat jungle and you're low threat, it's still better for you to ping him off and let him accelerate solo lanes, which will typically be much more killable. But you can put a halt to the War of Attrition for a wave, when he's around your lane. When we are playing the War of Attrition, there is a strong argument to be made for Mythic Rush and minimal investment into boots, into mobility, as you are planning to stay in lane and dominate. This is going to be contrary to my Enchanter video last year, where I placed a higher emphasis on having that mobility to roam around as the game goes on. I've developed this War of Attrition strategy, and it's very cohesive. With that being said, mobility may be a worthy investment in certain 2v2 matchups as well, where skill shots are prevalent for you to dodge and for you to get in range to land your own. Similarly, refill potion, very important for laning, and this is an item you want to heavily consider whenever you are doing the War of Attrition. Now, the better you get at the War of Attrition, the more dive opportunities there will be. This is the main time you want your jungler influencing your lane, diving low opponents and snowballing the game out of control. Just to understand that this is a high risk, high reward strategy to go for these dives. And if you have that opportunity, it's just a marker for you playing the War of Attrition well. Let's say that you leash and they don't. They get to start in lane. They get to control the wave from minute one, from wave one. You can let them get that early prior, which they're going to get regardless, and then you can use the third or the fourth wave to War of Attrition. Again, remember, every wave is a new opportunity for you to start that War of Attrition. Obviously, we can't ignore the enemy support, so if they respond to your pressure on their ADC by walking forwards, you can chunk them instead. And if they just run into you 1v2, you're going to kill them, but be prepared to punish the enemy ADC when you have the option. When your wave is under the enemy tower, you can look to punish the ranged minion last hit. It's going to be very tricky to punish the last hits for the melees, but for the ranged, it is much more accessible because the enemy ADC has to walk up further. That's what you see I am doing here. And also what you can notice from this game is I have gone 2 points into my poke ability because we are locked into that War of Attrition, because I'm going to find windows to poke and I don't feel the need to take my W. Something you can do as well. So the War of Attrition can be done pre and post 8 minutes. However, at 8 minutes, you can make an argument for Herald. I think that it's best to just stay bot, dominate 2v2. If the enemy support roams, then you can just stack a wave and dive. Otherwise, in a way, this can facilitate Herald for your team because you're pressuring so much that the enemy jungler, the enemy mid is pressured to try and relieve the pressure you're creating. And so that can give your team an opportunity to take Herald. So this is a blueprint that I want you guys to think about. Now, in reality, something is going to give before you cleanly poke them out and you force them to recall. They're either just going to randomly die, or maybe you or your ADC misplays and gets chunked and you can't War of Attrition. That's totally fine. Just understand the blueprint. If everything goes according to plan, you have an advantage. If the enemy ganks and messes up, if your jungler doesn't listen to you and ganks and messes up, whatever. So once you have forced the enemy ADC to back from getting poked out, don't get your bases cancelled. If the enemy support cancels your bases, then the enemy ADC can come back to lane and then he could shove a wave under your tower, then you could lose that wave. So be disciplined with where you are basing. Also, if you have lost the War of Attrition, go and cancel the enemy bases, especially the enemy ADC's base. This whole strategy is about trying to generate an advantage for your ADC in terms of waves. And so if you can cancel their base and then they're going to miss a wave in the future, fantastic. The last nuance I want to talk about is every range support has some type of disengage ability. What you can do is save your disengage ability for the gank, so you can position on mid/top side of the lane and save it for the incoming jungler, and you can poke with your poke spell. Now, most of my examples were from enchanters. I do want to emphasize that mages can do this just as well. You can have a Brand, a Zyra, a Vel'Koz, a Xerath dominating lane and saving their disengage ability once again for those ganks. Moving on with my South Island adventure, the next place that I checked out was Blue Lakes. This was a very flat track and I wanted to do this one next because I was still sore from my previous days running. It was very tranquil. There was a beautiful clear blue flowing stream. It was calm. There was also a lovely gravelly beach where people were just chilling out and enjoying the sun. So it was a quick walk. It was a chill spot. It was a pretty nice, kind of day off. And it was very close to where I was staying in Wanaka. I then decided to check out Wanaka Lake, and this is where the Wanaka tree, New Zealand's most famous tree and one of the most photographed trees in all of New Zealand, is at. It even has its own hashtag that Wanaka tree. It was awesome seeing it in person, and here you can see a photograph that someone took that won an award from it as well, so very well known. And then I decided to rent a kayak on Lake Wanaka that was so serene, so peaceful with the mountains ahead. I felt really at one with nature with no one in sight. I spent a little bit of time on Ruby Island, which is kind of like in the middle of the lake. I was a little bit rushed on there, but it seems like a pretty good place to chill. And in the early 20th century, this was a spot for a dance floor and tea room, so a bit of history there was pretty cool. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed. Big thank you to all of my Patreons over here. I really couldn't do this without you. The links for coaching, for Patreon, for my School of Support Discord server, for socials, they're all going to be linked in the description below. Any and all support is greatly appreciated.